time to start. So
Go start it up there and I will try to fix
greetings,
this.
everybody. I'm Karen Aronson, president of the class of 1970, which has been hosting monthly environment talks since the summer. It was part of our plan for our 50th reunion. And since we didn't do it in person, we decided to space them out and have monthly talks. Welcome to everybody who's joined us. I hope you're all well. We have a real treat this morning, a taste of spring and summer for those of us who are still surrounded by snow and expecting more. A couple of housekeeping matters first. Please mute yourselves so we don't have any distracting noises. Cynthia will talk for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we will open the floor to questions and discussions. If you would like to ask a question or to say something, please put a note in the chat function, and I will try to take people in the order in which they sign up. We are recording the session so that you and others can see it later. We started doing this a few months ago, and several of them are now posted on the Class of 1970 YouTube channel, which is a publicly accessible channel. It's also available through the Class of 1970 website, which you should also be able to access at 1970.alumclass.mit.edu. Our next event will be on March 10th on Red Tides, or algae blooms, by Don Anderson, who's a world-renowned expert on this subject, based at Woods Hole. With that, let me introduce Cynthia, a classmate who was a course 12B major, who worked in a variety of jobs at MIT and moved to Martha's Vineyard full-time after she retired in 2012. She took what was a fairly plain site on the vineyard and turned it into paradise. Cynthia, take it away.
Thank you, Karen. First, tiny correction. I actually retired in 2010 after 40 years of being an employee at MIT.
Sorry.
So I always said that it took me 40 years to actually graduate rather than the usual. It was 44 years rather than the usual 4. But I want to talk about our place here. We call it Esidarap, and it's something that we got into calling our little spot because we have been in the habit of doing things and then redoing them with what we think is a better idea. So we keep doing things going forward a couple of steps and then going backwards. And so we get to paradise backwards that way, and that's paradise spelled backwards, Esidarap. 40 years ago, this month, is when my then husband, Ken, and I started to think about having a second home. We were both private pilots. We had about 3 years of flying experience. We had newly minted instrument ratings, and we owned a Cessna 172. And we had a small 2-bedroom house in a cape in Lexington, about 15 miles from MIT. And it was on 1/7 of an acre of land. We wanted more space, and we wanted justification for having that airplane and being able to get somewhere on a weekend basis year round. So we started looking at land within 2 hours door to door of the house, land or a house. We couldn't find anything we could afford that was a house, but we did find a spot. Martha's Vineyard was a good place to go with an airplane. It's an island. It's about 2 hours from Lexington to the airport, unload, pack your plane, and then fly, and then unload and get to the land. So it's a little less than that sometimes, about that sometimes. And this is the spot we found it through serendipity. We were in the habit of chatting occasionally with the air traffic controllers at Hanscom Field, where we flew from. And they asked where we were off to, and we said we were looking at land on Martha's Vineyard. And they said, oh, we were talking to someone over at Boston, and they said that there's some land posted on the bulletin board at the tower at Logan. Would you be interested in knowing about it? And I said, sure. And they contacted Logan Tower, came back and said, are you ready to copy? So I copied down the phone number and the information, and that's how we found our land. And here's where it is. This is the spot where our land is. You can see the airport about middle, and we are at the corner. It's 2 acres and very flat, dry, scrubby land that was in a recent subdivision. It's what we could afford, and it was advantageous for several reasons. The owner at the time said there are no trees, and it indeed is about at the O and outwash in this picture, taken from a wonderful book by David Foster, published a few years ago. The island was formed by the retreat of the glaciers about 20,000 years ago, and it dropped most of its debris in 2 moraines, and those moraines have the large pieces, large chunks. They are very hilly, particularly the one on the left, on the west side of the island. And the debris melting out of the glacier, the small stuff, the gravel, the sand, and some clay pockets formed into this great plain in the middle. We're up at the northwest corner. These are aerials that Ken and I took in 81 and 87, and the arrows point to the southwestern corner of our piece of property. The orientation on the one on the right is about the same as the map we were just looking at. The other one's 90 degrees. And in the older one, you can see a white dot and 1 pine tree about in the middle of the lot. That white dot was from perk test sand, and the 1 pine tree was the 1 pine tree on the property. And you can see the edge of the outwash plain and a glacial river that had been formed from the moraine, because that's all scrub. And the trees were just starting to grow in this area. You can see they're getting a little more populated in the 87 aerial. And we're also getting a little more populated with houses. This is the house that we built. It was a panelized house that came from Canada, and I chose it because it was well insulated and it was affordable. It was 2x6 construction, 9 inches of insulation in the roof and ceiling, and 6 inches in the walls. And I made sure it was oriented for proper solar gain. I couldn't afford anything, but I wanted passive solar at the very least. And I did not like the way the north side looked. I found it ugly, and it was too tall in my eye. But I lived with it, and in 2000, many years later, I took an adult ed class and built a long retaining wall, low retaining wall, all the way around half of the house, and put in some plantings that included a blue atlas cedar, which is just showing in the second picture on the left, and now is over the height of the house. It definitely breaks up the front of the house. And you can see it in the lower picture. That's the same house, except the house is on the right, and I've ended up adding a garage in 2010 when I was planning to move here full time, as Karen said. So we've doubled the size of the house, more than doubled it, because there's a link between the 2 pieces. You can see it from the aerial in the middle. These two aerials are from Google Maps, satellite images. So the original house is on the left above the red dot, and the addition is to the right of that. So there's the 2010 image. The red dot, basically that whole red dot is where the pond is for your orientation. And you can see a current image. The blue dot is my office, that's where I'm sitting. And you can see the neighbors on either side. The lots are long and skinny. They're all about 2 acres in this area here. And on our street, on this side, they're long and thin. So it's about 450 feet deep, about 220 or so feet across. And after I had been a widow for a couple of years and wanted to do more with the property, and I'd sold the airplane, I decided to invest and put it into a pond. I wanted a water feature, I wanted a water garden, and I wanted to see the water. I lived on an island, but I couldn't see the water. Not yet. Global warming isn't that bad yet. So I decided I would build a pond, and everyone I talked to said, make it bigger than you think you're going to want. Make it bigger than you think you'll need. And I said, well, I want a water garden. And no, make it bigger than you think. And so I started making a hole. I needed some fill for a foundation for a woodshed. So that started the hole, put it to purpose. You can see the sand. This is what we have here. Occasionally we have some rocks, but the biggest rock has been about 18 inches that I've found here. All the rocks you're going to see in these pictures have been imported, except for the small stuff. When my now husband, Malin, who I met near the end of 2013, saw the hole in the backyard, he said, what are you doing with the fill? And I said, well, I'm paying to have it trucked away to the John Keene's Sand and Gravel. And he said, why don't you keep it? And you could build berms. And that started our sculpting the land. We have ended up building berms that have created variety. We have put in features in those berms like stairs to the tops. We have rooms that we've defined within the 2 acres. And we have the pond. And between those land spots, we have paths that we use to connect the places. The one in the middle is our original driveway, which is much better looking now than it was before. It's gravel. The current utility driveway on the other side is the new driveway, and that's got an electric gate that goes to our fence. We have a deer fence around most of the property, and we were required to put a fence up when we put the pond in, because they insisted that we had to follow pool regulations. If it had been a completely natural pond, it would have not required a fence. But since we were building it, we needed a fence. So we have lots of different paths. And as we were building berms, we were also doing all this construction outside while we were finishing the addition inside. And one of the things we decided to do was to repurpose what had been a garage and turn it into living space upstairs as had been planned, but also use the downstairs for an art studio and for a guest suite. In 2016, my dad died, but when we started this construction project, he was using a walker, and I thought we should have handicapped access to the house, both for ourselves at some future point and for my parents, because they're still with us. And so we added a ramp rather than build a wooden ramp or something else. We added soil and built an ADA accessible facility, access to the house itself. We did not do that path, and the stonework that's shown in that retaining wall and another one were done by the same gentleman, Carlos Braga. But the other paths have all, the pavers have all been laid by thaw. And many of our paths are just mowed. But these are some of the spaces and paths. So I'll run through the various spots that we have and just show you, mainly show you pictures here. So this is the front of the house now and the front of the studio. I designed the hardscape is one of the big features of this property. I designed the white gate and arch back when I was starting this project in 2011 or so. And when we redesigned how we were doing the addition, what we were going to use the addition for, it actually got moved. The gentleman who constructed it for me couldn't believe we'd actually managed to move this thing because it was firmly built on 4 posts that were deep in the ground. But we had a lot of labor here when we were doing the pond, so that was one of the things that we got help with. We have the front of the house, between the house and the studio, has this area that's in the middle, showing there's a cornice controversy there. It's a giant dogwood. It's not very giant, thank God, and it's an understory tree, so I think it will stay fairly small here. And that's a view of the front of the house, the front entrance now, with my original retaining wall, the part that still exists from that side. The rest of it's been taken away. So one of the many things that got taken away. Lower left, you see thaw in the background across the biggest piece of lawn we have, which is from the front of the house out to the front garden. And this is a locust arch that he sculpted and erected up there at the corner. There's my gate with a summer view with some of the cottage garden flowers. Again, that handicapped access to the studio, and the side in the spring with some poetica. Many of the bulbs that I have are actually from my mom's garden in Jamestown, Rhode Island. As she gets too many, she says, well, we dig that stuff up and take it away. And I still have plenty. So I've got many things that have come from her. This is the west side of the house. And we had put a berm there. The berms are good, not just visually, but also help to deflect sound from the nearby Old County Road, on the main road on the side. And they mainly add a visual distraction and a planting opportunity. So we've decided to cut into some of our berms. So we put steps up on this one, and then below those steps, you'll see a path that's in process, goes in, there's the house over on the right, and the path goes in through and is just starting to meet those steps at the end of its existence on the left right now. There's the locust arch at the top in the middle, and looking to the west to the gravel driveway. And there's a view down below it, looking towards that same area from the pond up to the northwest. And again, the locust arch is on the right, and there's an Abby's concolor, a blue fir. Actually, they're called white firs, but they're blue in my eye. So you can see the west yard and the small space of green that we do mow. I wanted a big vegetable garden. I've wanted it since I was in Lexington, and had managed to get a food garden started there. And I finally built myself raised beds in 2013, the picture on the top left. I recycled the mahogany that had been used for a deck in the front and was replaced during the construction. So I used fir blocks and bolted the whole thing together, and tried to preserve the mahogany by using some heavy duty plastic on the inside to keep the wood okay. They actually lasted about 8 years. No, they actually lasted about 6.5 years. And the fir started to rot, but the mahogany was still good. Thaw had the idea of replacing them with bluestone that we had recently seen at Cottle's, one of the local lumber yards. And he said we could stand it upright with rebar. So we went and cut rebar over at another sand and gravel place, Goodale's, and got the the bluestone, picked it out and had it delivered, and then looked at the pile and said, I think we need to call Carlos. So we had Carlos and his crew come and erect it for us because we wanted to save our backs so we could do something. So we now have these bluestone beds that are shown in the bottom pictures, and they are wonderful. They shouldn't ever have a problem, I hope. And that was my garden this past year on the left and the year before on the right. Up at the
Cynthia,
top. Yeah.
Cynthia, do you want to take questions as they come up, or do you want to hold them till the end?
I could take questions as they come up.
Well, there is a question about, says, how about maintenance? Who helps you? It looks like a lot of work.
Thanks, Jesse. We do our own work. We do all our own gardening. So it's really kind of a full-time job. And I produce most of the food that, all the vegetables that we eat are grown here. I haven't bought any vegetables for over a year. We were buying occasional things that were on special, but I haven't been in a grocery store since the pandemic started in March, so last year. So I haven't bought any fresh food. It's all from our gardens. So yeah, it is a lot of work, but it's actually, it's fun, and it's not all that much labor in some ways, but it's all a matter of perspective. The top right corner, that shows a bed of sweet potatoes that I grew from a sweet potato I had left from a bag that I had bought at Trader Joe's. Fortunately, I was buying, as I grow organic food, I was buying organic food. And if you buy organic sweet potatoes, you can sprout them, I discovered reading on the internet. And so I did last year for the first time, and I grew about 25 pounds of sweet potatoes, which we're having some tonight. And that's a fig in the middle. The first picture that I had up showed some of our fig trees that are in the ground and actually make it through the year okay. They sometimes go back to the base, to the root, or to the base, a couple of 6 inches or so, and then start out again. They're really shrubs more than trees here. But last year we had a great crop because we didn't have a really hard winter. So this is the back garden. That was the front garden. It's right behind the house. This is the garden in the back of the house with those raised beds. And down in the back, the bottom corner, you can see a view from 2016. We had finally decided, after doing the pond, we had decided that maybe it would have been a good idea to replace the septic system, which was over 30 years old because it was done with the house originally. And the septic system at that point was between the house and the pond. So I was a little nervous that if it failed, we would be in big doo-doo. And so we were in great contact with our friend Tony, who had the backhoe and did a lot of the construction for the pond with us. And oh, by the way, I've been the general contractor, literally, for every project on this property. It's not been something that I had a contractor for the original edition, and I ended up having to let him go. And Thaw and I managed all of these projects ourselves. He's been on an island residence since '74, full-time. He's a landscape artist, and not sculpting the landscape quite as we were, but painting it. But now we're both landscape artists, and I'm doing the painting not as much as I'd like, but we've been doing more sculpting. Anyway, this is a broad view of the land as it looked after Tony finished doing the septic system in the back. We have a leach field there under that large expanse of good-looking soil, and we turned that whole area into a meadow. The hardware that's kind of off to the right of the center of that picture is actually a water hydrant and lighting that we had put there before we decided to do the septic. And so we had that moved a couple of years later to over by the raised beds. Those raised beds are concrete tanks that are originally, they were poured without tops and bottoms, and they're originally meant to be 1,400 gallon septic tanks, and they're made over on the island at Goodale's Pit. So on special order, they will pour them without a top and bottom, and they're sold to people who want them for gardens. Not too many people know about it. We had actually talked with the owner about the idea of doing it a few years before, and he tried it, and it worked. So we now have 6 of them. And the view is taken from the top of the quote mountain that we created, with the soil from the septic digging and from the soil in the arbor in the back that's sunken. The sink over on the left of the bottom picture is a recycled sink that we've put together, and it's now next to the garden with that water. And these are some of the things that I've grown. I start all my plants from seed. If they can't be started in the soil directly, I start them in the house. We have lights under plant light in the connecting room, which we call the plant room. And in March, that's what it looks like on the back deck on a good day, March, April. And then I start putting things out. Actually, that's May, sorry, that was May. It was still a little bit early, because we're in a frost hollow with that scrub oak outwash bottom that I showed you. It's a frost bottom, and we still get frost sometimes in June here. In Chilmark, I think Jerry's in Chilmark, and they don't get as much cold weather as we get in the middle of the island. They're a little more sheltered by the ocean. Let's see, the bed, just to point out a couple of other things on here, not much. The bed below the deck picture on the left side is the garlic bed that I have successfully grown a lot of garlic in. And Thaw put in the irrigation that you see in the top picture. It's not completed yet, but we're able to use it, which is great. So we have all drip irrigation in the raised beds. Over in the top right, those are gooseberries, that's the picture of. And in the middle row, the other green picture is strawberries interplanted with onions. I read that that would work, and it worked exceptionally well this past year. And here's some of the stuff that I've grown. I freeze the berries on trays and then bag them. So we have blueberries almost every morning. That's radicchio up over on the top right that I've managed to grow. I just harvested the last of it. It's in the crisper right now. We're still eating green salads. That salad was from December 16th, but we're still eating green salads from outside. I still have kale, even though we got 8 inches of snow this week. That's the most snow we've had in 2 years. And let's see. Oh, and over in the bottom left, those are some of the squash waiting to go downstairs to the basement. And that's a picture of one of Thaw's early pointillistic landscapes in the background. And this is moving into some of the other rooms. So these are not food production rooms. The Birch Room. And it's on the west and south of the pond. The picture on the lower bottom, there's a hill or a berm on the left. That actually is the side of the stream of the pond. And the path leads out to the meadow in the back. That's the winter view. The spring view is above it, with the variegated dogwood showing on the right side. And the pinks on the top middle, that picture with the peachy colored azalea and the background and the red leaf maple, that's the top of the pump house. It's a garden with succulents primarily, and the ferns are on the side of the stream. The lower left, the view is going into the Birch Room from the south, and the pump house is on the right. And that star moss, that's one of our native plants that's growing. That's a spring view of it. The winter view is over on the right side. It's kind of a dull green in the winter, but it's beautiful in the spring. This is our meditation room. And I find I meditate more as I walk slowly into it than actually stopping. But I am trying to stop a little more these days and appreciate this particular spot. It's the east side of the mountain, and the path on the left leads you down to the raised beds. On the right, it's the path going up to the pump house. And you can see on the left side, the deer fence, that's part of what's been put up all the way around, which is one of the reasons why we're able to grow as much as we are growing. When we had to put the pool regulation fence up, this meets the pool regulations, and the zoning board agreed that we could do it. We didn't have to do it right around the pond, that we could do it around the property instead. And that gives us terrific coverage to keep the deer out. The island is overpopulated with deer. This is the view of the mountain and the meadow. So here's Thaw. Tony is helping us move some of the rocks that we have bought let's see, I think those came from Dave Merry in West Tisbury. And we're putting them up at the top, so we have rocks to sit on at the top of the mountain, which is about 10 feet higher, I think at the most, than the ground elevation. The lower picture on the left shows steps going up to the top of the mountain. There's a lumber pine there on the top right of that picture that we bought on the island, and it's doing quite well. The winter view in the center at the top is the meadow. And then the other pictures are the meadow, and a view in the middle, the lupin view below the winter view is looking up at the mountain from the meadow. You can't really tell it's a mountain, it's so shallow, but it does give elevation, and when you're here, you actually see it a little better. So this is the construction of the arbor. Tony was here working on the septic, and we said, while you're here, we want a place to have grapes. And oops, sorry about that. And we had been visiting several gardens, including some beautiful gardens here on the island at a private area called Seven Gates. And we really admired some of the recessed areas. So we decided we could put one in here and be able to look up at the meadow that we were creating. That's the view in the lower right corner. And the grasses that you're looking at in the lower right corner show that actually, if you look straight, you look at some tall grasses that we planted that block the view of the raised beds of the garden. And this is, again, a situation where we decided to hire Carlos rather than to do the wall ourselves. Both Thaw and I had built stone walls, but we thought, no, this time we're going to let the professionals do it and get it done in our lifetime. That's the summer view of the meadow. And this is the construction of the pond. The pond has definitely been other than planting, let me stop for a second actually, the biggest thing until the pond that I ever did to help with the landscaping here and to help with what I saw was to put in 5 1-gallon pots of rhododendrons in the front. And in the aerial images, you could see later on the Google Map images, particularly even the aerial from '87, you could see the rhododendrons. They form life year-round view that's green, and they give shelter to the birds. The pond is obviously now the biggest other thing that we've done in terms of landscaping. And it was a huge project. If I had known how big a project it was, I probably would never have started it. But I'm glad I didn't know, because it's completely changed the way this property is for us and for the local environment. We have a friend who's an ornithologist, and he said, you have provided something that the birds have been missing in this area because it is so dry. There is no interior water in this particular area on the island. And we have a lot of birds that visit, migrants that will stop by. Unfortunately, we don't attract all the migrants that go by here, and it's a very big area for migrant birds. But we do get a lot of migrants that come through, and we have a very happy population of birds that live here with us. It's also obviously changed the way we use the land. And this is the process that we were going through in 2014.
Cynthia, do you want to wind down shortly if you want to allow time for questions? And
I'm going to go through quickly, okay? Yeah.
okay,
Okay, so
it's been fascinating.
yeah,
This is great.
so that's the digging of the pond and the work. Obviously, I had decided I needed to have a professional help. All I knew about swimmable natural ponds, which is what eventually I knew it was going to be. All I knew was what I'd read on the internet, and I decided I needed somebody who understood the irrigation, the proper flow of water and pumping and all of that. And it was a huge project. I never would have been able to do it. We had to actually glue together the rubber. It's the biggest. I would never do it with rubber again, but it's the biggest rubber that our pond guy ever did and ever will do. We had to use the field at the end of the road to do it. We needed a space, was big enough. And here's our pond guy, Dan Whiting, with us at the pump house. There's our house in the background in the top left. And these are some views of the pond. It's been an absolute delight. And in April of this year, right after the pandemic hit, we decided it was the right time to make our marriage legal. And so we got married at our pond. And our dear neighbor, Georgie, who lives next door, is over on the right on the dock. She officiated, and our best friends, Judy and Wayne, were the other guests. And Judy was the one who introduced Thaw and me in November of 2013. That's an early spring evening. Those are pinkletinks on Martha's Vineyard. They came because of the pond. They're spring peepers. Here are some more of the residents and the visitors to the pond. One of the first birds we had show up was a solitary sandpiper, a migrant from the north. We have frogs that showed up on their own. There's a pollywog in the middle there that I took a picture of with my iPhone. The odonates, the dragonflies, love this pond. And you can see the one on the left is just out of his carapace. It's still on the dock next to him on the right. That is a great blue heron that showed up in, I think it was August this past year. And we do swim in it. That's Thaw in the background by the waterfall, and some of his grandnieces and nephews enjoying the pond. That's a frog that actually allowed me to put my hand underneath him in the middle. And that's the spring peeper over there. He's a little tiny frog about the size of your thumbnail. And that's bullfrogs they came to. These are some of the plants at the pond. We have a lot of irises. The very first plant was an iris donated by Dan, who has his own small pond, smaller, a lot smaller. I learned that regular lilies, daylilies, will grow in water. I have learned to plant things just in the gravel and don't use any pots anymore. And in the top right, the top center above pond plants, that's an elderberry growing in the crack in the between some rocks on the pond. These are some other flowers on the grounds. We have a mix of natives and imports, and the lower left, we have many wonderful, incredible lady slippers in the spring that are native, obviously. And the lower on 2 over from that, that's Mayflower. That's what the state flower of Massachusetts is. It has a beautiful scent. It's an early spring bloom. It's low to the ground. You have to get down really flat on the ground to smell it. And that's Seaside Goldenrod with the pollinator up above that. These are some of the flowering shrubs. That's an azalea that it actually grew from seed of 2 other azaleas that I had bought. That's Pyrrhus japonica buds, top left. Those are beauty berries, the purple berries. That's over on the top right. It's a French pussy willow in bloom. That's a Sarah Holden North Tisbury azalea. It's a clone of one at Polly Hill. The Arboretum, I volunteer at the Polly Hill Arboretum as one of the docents there, tour guide when there's no pandemic. It's a beach plum that's on the side of the pond. I planted that around '84 and built the pond around it. And that's St. John's wort down on the bottom. That's Calycanthus, the red, almost rose-like flower. It's a shrub. And that's Thaw and Me, I think that was 2016. With that rhododendron, one of the 5 that I talked about that were in a 1-gallon pot. These are some of the flowering trees. We have at the bottom left and right, there are 2 types of Pterostyrex on the property. One is a Histata on the left. The top left is red vein Enkianthus, and the top center is an Elysium. It's an anise tree shrub. And that top right is Stewartia monodelpha. In the center, on the middle, is a Franklinia bloom. That blooms in September and it has beautiful scent. And these are some of the butterflies, moths, and other pollinators. The top right, most unusual one, is, unusual for me anyway, is a giant silk moth that showed up a year or so ago. And these are some of the pollinators. It only has taken a little work to get to where we are. And as I said, we often are doing things backwards. The top left corner shows you what my wall, well, actually that part was only partly my wall. The wall had actually been done. I did the steps. I did the pathway and the wall on the left and part of the wall on the right. But that's the original entrance to the house, and that all got taken away. And we put down the professional flat stones to make it easier to get in and a little better grade. Again, there's Thaw with the rocks going on the mountain. I've redug that center top image. I've done that 3 times in the time that I've lived here. That's the latest in 2019. And there's me starting to just after having put soil into those raised beds. The bottom 15 inches is all gravel to keep any voles and anything from digging up and provide drainage, and just getting ready to plant. On the bottom left, that's what we could call the gravel driveway before it was properly excavated and had gravel put on top. And there's with some help, putting in about 1,000 feet of deer fencing with some 10-foot rebar. And me starting to put in, I don't know how many thousands of plants in the pond. And that's how we sometimes feel at the end of the day, a little bit melted. But that's just before we take a shower and jump into the pond. And it's been so rewarding. So there we are. There are rainbows at Esidarap. And we just have just had a lovely, wonderful time being able to help to construct this backwards paradise. And that's it.
Cynthia, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful paradise with us, and all the work and all the wonderful what you've gotten out of it, and we've now gotten out of it. We have 4 immediate questions that I can see. So if people will unmute themselves when I call on you. Jen Jernecka, if you're still there, Jen.
While we're waiting for Jen, I just wanted to say that, and before we started, I think I mentioned that Karen and Greg had been here, but before most of this was done, Marianne Ribet, who's with us from France, was here again before most of this was done. And Bob Gerber's been here, and Bob helped me plant some of the rhododendrons out front that I learned that the big ones that I'd put in, once they got big, I learned that they were self-layering, and I was able to cut branches off the bottom that had roots and just move them. And that's how I created almost all the rhododendrons on the property. So he helped me do a whole row of rhododendrons out the street side. So it's nice to have people who've actually been here, and I hope several of you are able to come and visit once we're past this pandemic.
I hope so too. Jen, are you there? If not, Jerry and Marilyn, I don't know which of you wanted to ask a question or make a comment.
Yes, your arrangement of gardening reminded me of a TV show called Crockett's Victory Garden. He had all raised beds, and I think he was in Massachusetts as well. Are you aware of that? Did he inspire you, or just you arrived at that format independently?
I loved Crockett's Victory Garden. I watched it religiously. He's been a background inspiration. I've got his book. But the raised beds were partly inspired by the fact that the soil here is so terrible. I needed to add soil to be able to grow anything. And again, this is an outwash plain with gravel and sand and clay. And a little clay is good to retain water, but not too much. And so, yeah, I've been inspired by a lot of writing and a lot of reading that I've done. And Crockett was definite influence. Yes, thanks.
So we should also mention that Martha's Vineyard is probably a place where a number of people, wealthy people, have fancy gardens and fancy gardeners, and some Martha's Vineyard gardening magazine picked you and your garden to focus on recently. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, Thaw and I have been asked to give a presentation to the Martha's Vineyard Garden Club, which we are members of. So as I worked on putting all this together, I kept saying to myself, okay, this is a double duty presentation, because we're supposed to talk in October about this, and we've already been featured online with it. Not the whole thing, obviously, but with some basic pictures and a run through of some of the ideas that we had.
So, okay.
We've actually been featured a couple of times in the paper too, either in MD Style magazine or in Times.
Next question, William Lee Roberts. Unmute yourself.
Hi there. I had two questions. Is there a site plan that shows how all of this fits together? Because it's kind of hard to figure the various areas with just the Google Earth view at the beginning. I would love to see a site plan. And the other question that I had was, I noticed you use these, they look like they're like 18 or 24-inch square pavers throughout square pavers. And everything else seems to be very naturalized and rustic. And I wondered why you use these geometric forms in the midst of all of that.
Thanks, William. We did. Can you hear me? Am I on? Okay. Yeah, we use the pavers in part because we actually like the look. We do have some paths that are just mowed. We've got one that's the cut grasses from the tall grasses that have remained. When we started with a pond, by the way, one other thing we did backwards was we bought a lot of large grasses thinking they would look great around the pond. And they lasted for a couple of years until we realized they were much too big and tended to be invasive. So we've gotten rid of most of them. The few that weren't, we've managed to save, and we've used the ones that we have down by the raised beds. So I went back to this shot that shows the Google Earth view on the right side where it says Skiff's Lane, and the blue dot defines where my house is. And you can see our barn in the back with the solar panels. We've got over 100 solar panels, and we're basically energy independent. We added the barn after we had the pond going. We realized we were no longer energy independent with the pond pumps, and so we added the barn, and now we are off the grid pretty much, although we don't have batteries, so we're not off the grid. But you can see, if you go from the bottom of that Google map, you can see the arbor, you can see the raised beds, you can see the meadow to the left of the raised beds, the big ones. Then if you go up to the barn, there's actually an orchard to the south side of the barn solar panels. And then if you follow the path from the barn to the east, to the right, you go up past the beds that are actually the garlic bed, the raspberries, the blueberries, and you get lost a little bit, which is a common thing around here. But you can then take a left and go over to the waterfall end of the pond, and there's the pond in the kind of the middle. And then if you go up, you see the house. And there are parts that it's hard to tell from, you're right, from here. But if you go past the blue dot to the top of towards the top of the picture, that's the front where I was showing you the front gardens. So I mean, that's about the best I have. I don't have a site plan other than that. And in fact, when we started with the pond, I had a drawing that I had done of the pond, and it showed the birch trees, it showed where the rocks were going to go, and it showed the general shape. So yeah, we're very informal about plans around here.
Cynthia, so Jan said doesn't have a speaker, but wrote a comment and a question into the chat. The comment is, heaven will be an anticlimax when you leave this world. And the question is, there are a lot of trees. Did you have to plant them all?
I have planted all of the exotics, all of the ones that I mentioned in name on the flowering trees. But when you look at this Google Maps picture that's showing, all those oak trees have now filled in by themselves. And the actual native trees are filling in. This is the way a forest grows when it's left alone. The scrub oak that I showed you in the earlier view, and even, well, it looks more like it in the view to the left, but that's just 10 years ago, because it's just treeless without the leaves on it. But the Google Earth, the aerials that I took in 81 and 87 show the trees starting to grow in this area. This area was cut the scrub oak was the primary vegetation after the glaciers, and I mean after things started to grow at all, and then it was cut and used as wood. It didn't grow very well, so it was hard for it to regenerate because the soil was so bad, and it's a part of the island that was not used. It was considered a desert, maybe a hunting ground by the natives, which I'm sure was true because the deer must have loved it. But basically, it was not something that was a desirable piece, which is why it was so late to development and why I could afford it. But no, we did not plant all of these oaks. The red and the white oaks that are here are native. The birch trees are native. They came in, we got one large birch that showed up, and I basically have moved a few of the birches, but most of them I've just cut out extras that were in the wrong places and allowed to grow others that were where I wanted them. And so I've managed the growth of the trees, but I have not moved them.
Thank you.
Haven't-
One more question, Gerald Clark, and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I'll warn you up front. I've been in public health and in conservation for a number of years. I'm on Massachusetts Open Space, Groundwater Management, Board of Health, etc. So my perspective in looking at all of this was I'm just curious. I know Barnstable County's operations, but I'm not that familiar with Duke's. And to what extent did you have to do filing, modification of your plans? Were there impediments that arose because of the Wetlands and Groundwater Management Acts? Just curious.
Thanks, Jerry. The permits that we needed to get were from the zoning board here in West Tisbury. There's no water at the surface. There's no wetlands here at all. It's all completely dry. It's arid land. It's droughty, to use the word that David Foster used in his book. So no, there was no impact on existing water here. We have used water from our well to fill the pond, and it is recirculated water. So we do not keep adding water to it, except as it does evaporate. And it does evaporate. So I understand that there are environmental impacts in terms of the management of that water. However, we've also sought to minimize the environmental impact by not having any fertilizers. Everything we do is organic. We use no artificial fertilizers. We have very little that is mowed here. So we've tried to minimize the amount of impact. Some of the areas, well, you can see even in this picture here at the bottom, on the right, you can see the house next door on the right has a fairly large open mowed area. It's worse as you go in some of the other houses in the area. So, you know, a lot of people have clear cut. A lot of people have just opened up spaces and put in large lawns, and I don't think that that's a good way to use the property. I feel like it's better to, if I were not able to do what I've done, I would have just tried to leave it as undeveloped as possible. And in a way, we have managed to bring in plants, but we have not taken away very much in terms of what didn't need to be taken away. The septic work had to be done, and so that brush was removed, and we put in a meadow instead of maintaining open grassland there and an open lawn. The area around the house had been excavated, and the contractor dumped all of the fill from the foundation hole on top of the existing soil. So I was dealing with 1.5 feet of subsoil all around the house, and it stood out for about 30 feet from the house. So I had a huge area that basically was hardly able to support any life. and I wanted to minimize the amount of grass. So yeah, I understand that there are impacts to everything. And that's one of the reasons why I never wanted something like a swimming pool, because I don't want to add chemicals to an environment. And I wanted, anything I did, I wanted to at least support more life. And what we've ended up doing has supported the life of the natural, the birds, the insects, and the critters.
Well, I commend you. As you probably know, Dukes County was the only area of Massachusetts that remained under the Drought Management Task Force declaration of drought and eventually excessive dryness into the fall. And it's probably going to be a continuing pattern. So
Right.
clearly what you've done protects that. Do you think that, given that you've created now a wetland which may generate vegetated wetlands, do you think that you may at some future point, if you were to sell the property or make changes, that there would be an issue because of that? Or will they grant you that this was all man-made and therefore not subject?
That's an interesting question. I believe I explored that with someone in the beginning and was told that it would not be considered a natural wetland. It really, unfortunately, is not a natural wetland. I mean, there are times when I think of it as a natural wetland. But if we were to turn off the pumps, we would have water in the pond until it evaporated. But we don't have a natural swale. We don't have the kind of terrain that supports that. And as much as I would like to have that, we don't. So I don't know if rules might change in the future, but right now I don't believe it is considered something.
Yeah. You may want to keep I agree with you at this moment. There are some amendments to Wetlands Management Act that are published on the state DEP website, but I don't think anything's going to happen with them for at least a year or more.
Well, I have no intention of selling, and I would hope that anybody who bought it, if I ever did have to sell, would see the value of maintaining it the way it is, rather than try to do anything different and destroy it. But that's my feeling.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank everybody. I don't see further questions, and it's a bit afternoon. So let me thank Cynthia once again for an amazing tour of her amazing property work. Thanks also to Nancy Mims and Jesse Hines for their help on presenting this, and to Cardinal and Gray and Rick Lufkin for their presentation. Hi, Rick. Thank you very much. Class 70 is part of Cardinal and Gray, and we're happy to be part of you. And we're happy to have everybody else from Cardinal and Gray and from Amida and from the other groups that have joined us today. Hello to classes 70 folks. As we have said in the chat, this has been recorded. It will be available probably sooner rather than later on our new YouTube channel, which is publicly available. And you can find, Jesse has posted in the chat function where you can find it, or you can just Google Class of 70 YouTube channel, I suspect. Jesse, do you want to say something about that?
I put the URL in the chat. I can stick it there again, but if you just go to 1970.alumclass.mit.edu, you will see the link there.
So
we will post this one as well.
And the last several class of 70 environment talks are also posted there. The one on the California air is there. I think tornadoes is there, Jesse, and one other. So our next one again is March 10th, and it will be about.
Excuse me, can I ask a quick question? This is Carl Sandon, class of 57.
Sure.
Could you post right now some of those connections for the recording instead of going so fast?
They're
At my
all,
age, it takes me an awful long time to write them down.
they're all on the class of 70 page, which is 9. Jesse, run it again. It's
I'm gonna,
Slowly.
yeah, hang on, Carl.
Yeah.
Carl, can you see the chat?
No.
Okay, Carl, move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, and you'll see it should pop up a little menu at the bottom of the screen, and there should be a button there that says chat.
It does not.
No? Okay.
No.
How about typing, if you're on Windows, type Alt H?
No, I'm just on an iPad.
Oh, you're on an iPad. Okay. Okay. So
Just repeat it slowly.
okay, here we go. Ready? 1,
Yes.
2, 3. 1970 dot alum class dot MIT dot edu.
Thank you.
You are very welcome.
You'll find our YouTube channel, which will soon have this talk, and it also has the last several, but unfortunately not all of the ones because we didn't start recording from last summer. But this will be, I think, the 4th one we've recorded. So.
And that YouTube channel again, slowly.
Well, it's
Yeah.
our class webpage. It's 1970 dot alum class, as in
Okay.
ALUM class
Right.
.mit.edu. And then you'll find it all there and you
Okay,
should
thank
be
you.
able to access it. Everybody, thank you again.
One other quick question, if I may. Could Ms. Bloomquist give an overall cost of what it was to develop this over the last 30 years? I am not going out tomorrow to do it.
I have not kept track over 30 years of what it cost, but I will say that until I retired, it was minimal because I didn't have the money. Once I sold the second house in Harvard, Mass, and sold the airplane, I had some cash that I could invest, and I ended up putting it into what was important to me in terms of
Very good.
that I used.
Oh, wonderful presentation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I'm an old farmer from a big old dairy farm in Connecticut, and our landscape was a little bit different than this.
We have some other landscapers. Tim Heball's on. I know he does work in this area. We may have others. So thank you again, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Thank you to all Rick, thanks again to you. Jesse, Nancy, thank you for your help. Come back next month and learn about red tides.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.